Good morning. Welcome back. And before we go ahead and start, yeah, for many people my age, younger, a little older, this was a big loss. Of course, that's on lead guitar from their best album, 1984, their biggest selling album. That, of course, is Eddie Van Halen. For some of you who are paying attention, Eddie Van Halen died a couple of days ago at the age of 65 from, I think it was throat cancer. Very big in the sound recording industry. Van Halen burst onto the scene in 1977 with their debut album, Running with the Devil, Eruption, You Really Got Me, their cover from the Kinks' old song. And they went on to sell tens of millions of records, not only in America, but worldwide. Might have went over 100 million records worldwide. Iconic band, frontman David Lee Roth, of course, Eddie Van Halen on the lead guitar. Considered by many the best, if not one of the top three best guitarists in music history. And they pretty much ushered in an era that, they started in 77, got huge by the 80s, and then ushered in an era which is commonly referred to as the hair band era. Of course, with not only Eddie, but David Lee Roth, the lead singer, with the hair all over the place, and, now men using more hairspray, hairnet than women were using. And it ushered in a Dynamite era, Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and many of these others. And of course, it also helped to usher in, which was now already starting, but Van Halen really put a stamp on what is referred to as stadium rock, where you would actually have these big rock bands that would play nothing but stadiums. And they did fill quite a few stadiums, Van Halen did. So Eddie Van Halen, at the age of 64, just a real tough loss for a lot of people who, around my age, and maybe a little younger, a little older, iconic rock band. So, all right, let's get to what a lot of you are waiting for, okay? I had quite a few really good guesses, but I also think some of you overthought this just a little bit, because one of the things is this really not mentioned in your book, the answer to the extra credit question, and that is what American phenomenon helped to push the sale of TV sets, the creation and sale of television. It really helped to create television. Well, one of the things that I try to stress in this class, it's one of the reasons why I love the television chapter. I mean, it would take me an entire semester to really go over this chapter and talk about the history of television and where it's going and that kind of thing. But it's only one chapter in our class. But one of the things that I always try to stress from the beginning of the semester is the fact that as a being, human beings, we love to be visually entertained. We love visual stimulation. It's just who we are. And if you don't think so, go back to the ancient Greeks. They say a lot of Western culture comes from the ancient Greeks. And one of the biggest facets, one of the biggest things about, what the ancient Greeks gave us were the Greek theaters. Okay? And it was the Greeks who showed us how to be visually entertained. And we, of course, have been filling theaters up since the time of the ancient Greeks. And we always like to be visually entertained. And so, of course, when movies first came out, and we'll talk more about that in the movie chapter after your midterm, it became an instant sensation. And then, of course, when sound came to films, well, that's all she wrote. Matter of fact, by 1939, as you guys know from one of the quizzes I gave you, okay, the first quiz I think it was, is Gone with the Wind. If adjusted for inflation, is the biggest box office hit of all time because so many people went to go see it. It was big, it was colorful, had great sound, and we loved to be visually entertained because when we went home, there wasn't anything there. There was a radio. Yes, we love radio, but I wanted to be visually entertained. So now World War II comes. And then after World War II, okay, World War II is now over. All the boys start coming home. Now remember, as I claimed, in 1946, we were selling 90 million movie tickets per week. Okay? What that meant is that, as I had stated to you before, if you go back to towns, like if you live in Ridgewood or no Ridgewood or Westwood or North Arlington, where the Arlington Theater, I think, still is or was, theaters, big theaters were in the center of town, where if you lived in that town, you were within walking distance. But even if you weren't, there were still other theaters all around. A lot of theaters that don't exist anymore. For example, if you live in Fairlawn, right off the corner of Fairlawn Ave and River Road, just down from the diner, there used to be a theater. It doesn't exist anymore because after television came along, it stayed for a little while as a community theater, but then, of course, it finally went out of business. But they were, and it would only sat like 120 people, but they were little theaters like that all over. This is before the multiplexes came. Okay, so you could walk 6, 7, 8 blocks, and people would go to the movies 3 or 4 times a week. It wasn't uncommon for you after dinner, the way people do today. After dinner, you go into the recliner and you go sit and watch TV in the living room. Well, at least older people do. I know a lot of young people don't do that. But back then, you would go and walk down the street. Dinner's over. Let's go down to the movies. And it wasn't uncommon 3, 4 times a week because of that visual entertainment. But then by 1950, we're now down to 60 million tickets sold every week. And by 1955, 46 million. So in 9 years, movie tickets get cut in half. And it's not just because of Uncle Milty, Milton Berle, Mr. Television, but who is perpetuating such a rise and explosion of television? What American phenomenon? Well, let me show you something here. Some of you will recognize this picture. Okay? For those who don't know, this is the iconic photo of Rosie the Riveter. Now, what Rosie the Riveter was, is when the men were fighting in World War II. And yes, there was some of it. It's nowhere near the way it is today, where women can actually fight in combat units and that kind of thing. So a lot of the men went over to fight World War II. They're in the German theater. They're in the Pacific theater. The women stayed home. And a lot of women ended up going to work, like Rosie the Riveter. They would work 12-hour days, 6 or 7 days a week. They would work in these factories, building stuff for the war. Well, when the war ended, a lot of Rosie the Riveters said, all right, you're home now, buddy. I've been writing you your letters when I had my breaks. I've barely gotten sleep in the last 2 or 3 years. Guess what? Get me a ring. Get me a house. We're getting married. And that's exactly what happened. And of course, what happened after they all started getting married? Here's your phenomenon, people. It was the baby boom. The baby boom was what really sparked the huge explosion of television. Because think about this. 1946, you're going to the movie theaters like 3 or 4 times a week. But for you, right? When you're at a theater, let's say you're going to watch one of your Marvel, I'm sorry, people. One of the things that I'm very proud, So they want my sunlight. Hold on, I got to go turn the light on. That sunlight was working very well for me. All right, there we go. Okay, now, if you're, what was I saying? Oh, if you're going to see one of your Marvel or, I'm so proud to say this, I do not know the difference between Marvel and DC. I really don't. It's just not my thing. Now, I don't fault anybody who is big into those things. I've got friends my age and older than me who can't stand the fact that I don't know the difference between Marvel and DC. But anyway, let's say you're going to one of those Marvel movies. Somebody standing up in the middle of a good scene or a couple of people chit-chatting. But what is especially very annoying is when someone brings a baby to the movies. Well, think about what's going on in 1947. And I say 1947 because one of my grandfathers, who actually landed on Normandy Beach at D-Day as an Army medic, came home from World War II, married my grandmother, and in March of 1947, my mother was one of the first of the baby boom at the beginning. So now it's 1947 where all these people have babies. By 1948, some people are already on their second child. How are we going to the movies? Levittown, Long Island, the first ever suburb, has already been constructed. People are starting to move in. But how am I taking these babies to the movies? But wait a minute. Now I can get my visual entertainment from home? You mean I don't have to drag my babies to the theater anymore and bother all these people and have to change a diaper halfway through the best scene of the film? Because I can get my visual entertainment at home? So it was the baby boom. Because now, I mean, Uncle Milty was a big thing from 1948 to 1950 to go from 50,000 to 500,000 sets. But when you have some people, like my other grandfather, who was now on his second child by 1950, and he also fought in the German theater. He was in the Army Air Corps. That's the baby boom. Actually, both my because I guess my Uncle Don, my mother's brother, was also born in 1949. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I mean, both my grandfathers are on their second, my grandparents are on their second child before 1950. That was the baby boom. That's what happened is people came back from the war. Rosie said, I'm done. Get me a house. Get me a ring. Let's go. And the baby boom really helped to spark this huge explosion. So there were a lot of good guesses. I think a lot of people overthought it just a little bit. But yeah, the baby boom was the American phenomenon that helped really the explosion of television. Okay, I do have some links I want you to look at, some great moments in the history of TV. A couple of things I do want to mention. Number one, cable television really helped to explode TV because for the longest time, you only had the three networks. Now, in New York City, okay, we had 6 TV stations. We had Channel 2, Channel 4, and Channel 7. Okay? Now, those 3 were network affiliates. Channel 2 for CBS. They still are. Channel 2 for CBS, Channel 4 for NBC, and Channel 7 for ABC. And then we had 3 independent stations. That was Channel 5, which was WNEW at the time, Channel 9, and Channel 11. And then, of course, later on we had PBS. So we were the lucky people. We had 6, possibly 7 television stations. We could choose them. 7. We felt like we were the lucky ones. We felt like, oh my God, we have so much to choose from. Most other markets in America, though, who couldn't, I mean, again, it's so expensive to run a television station. I mean, the electric costs are just unbelievable through the roof. But most other markets can only support 2 or 3 television stations. So cable TV was huge. And it was interesting. I thought cable TV took forever to get here. We could have got TV a long time ago. I mean, it all had to do with, you can put the phone into the wall from the telephone pole. How come we can't do the TV also? And that's exactly what happened. Is that somebody discovered that you could take this cable, run it down through the telephone pole into your house. You don't have to worry about that big antenna up at the top of your house anymore, picking up an over-the-air signal, which television was and still is. You could still have a reception in your television where it comes from an antenna. Okay? But yeah, it was just like you can pump it into your house. And what's more is, I remember as a kid, you'd have a TV set and you'd have to have the antenna and you're trying to get the signal right. Even though you're like only 15 miles from where the transmitter is, and you're hoping that, the TV's not in the right place, or, maybe there's a house that's right next door to you that's blocking the signal. It was things like that, especially if you were in the living room, or if you were in your basement and you had a TV set, forget about it. Unless you were hooked up to the antenna that was on top of the house, you were hardly getting anything. But what the cable did is it brought it into you. Somebody else had the antenna. At a location, like for example, I live near Oakland, New Jersey, in northern Bergen County, and they have a place for Optimum, has a headquarters. And of course, that's where they have, their little big gigantic dishes and everything else to receive it. And then, of course, we get it through our cables, through the telephone pole. But what it did is it opened up a lot of opportunities, especially, I tell you, no one, and I mean no one, benefited more from cable television than our Spanish language TV networks. Up until this point, And it still is Channel 41 and Channel 47 here in New York. And that's where Telemundo and Univision's affiliates are here in the New York City area. Channel 41, I think, is out of Patterson, and Channel 47 is out of New York. And they were on what's called UHF channels. See, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13 were all what we call VHF, or very high frequency. That's the most powerful frequency. But the rest of them, which was channel 14 to 81, was what we call ultra high frequency. And that's where channel 41 and 47 were. And you had to have a special antenna for the UHF. And even then, because it was such an ultra high frequency, to not interfere with the VHF stations, 2, 4, 7, 9, 11, and 13, that you could barely get it. And I'll never forget, in the mid-1970s, my grandmother, the house I was born in, Jersey City, right next door to us was an apartment, like a 3-4 family housing apartment that was owned by a Puerto Rican family. And I'll never forget, being out in the backyard and seeing the grandmother. She would be out on the fire escape trying to watch TV, and you would see like half the picture would be snow. It wouldn't be all the way in because, and this is in Jersey City. How far is Jersey City from the transmitter in New York? Not very far, because it was an ultra high frequency. Well, once you got cable come into the house, crystal clear. And suddenly now, if you were Spanish speaking in the New York City area and you wanted Spanish television, now you could get it, no problem. And as much as anybody, our Spanish language television stations greatly benefited. Another guy benefited well from this too. He's in your textbook. He's a guy by the name of Ted Turner. Some of you might know Ted Turner or his flagship station because you've been watching the Yankee games, the Yankee playoff games. What Ted Turner was, he was this multimillionaire down in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was fiddling around with a lot of different things. As a matter of fact, he made national news in 1977 when he won an American yacht racing competition, and he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine. Back when Sports Illustrated had a circulation of about like 5 or 6 million magazines a week. So he became a household name, and he owned a small little television station in Atlanta called WTBS. And he named it after himself, Turner Broadcasting System. So WTBS was Channel 17 in Atlanta. Well, once cable starts coming along around 76, 77, 78, he gets an idea. He says, like Sarnoff did with NBC, where if you're an affiliate, I'll provide the talent, and you then split the profits, you and I, from your ad that you sell in your market. I'll do the same thing. You cable companies carry my WTBS, and then we'll split the advertising. So now all of a sudden, this little Channel 17 in Atlanta, you could see it on a cable system in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Billings, Montana, Detroit, Michigan, LA, California. It was everywhere. So what, of course, he had to do, number one, he had to stop dropping his own ads. I mean, he still had advertisements for the first couple of months, and I'll never forget seeing this. He had like, a Dodge dealership in downtown Atlanta. And of course, if you're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that's a waste. You're not going all the way to Atlanta to buy a Dodge. But he later dropped that. He then, of course, dropped the W because he became what was then called the Superstation. And he made buku bucks. And he took those buku bucks and created the first ever cable-only news station. And that, of course, was CNN, the Cable News Network. He invented that, and it went on the air in 1979. And, of course, Ted Turner also owned the Atlanta Braves baseball team, which he called America's team because you could watch it anywhere in America on your cable systems, and it helped to bring him in a lot of money. So Ted Turner really took advantage of this whole cable TV thing. It's difficult to talk about television today and where it's going because we don't even know. COVID has really changed the landscape of television. Now, the thing is, a lot of you are like, I don't watch TV. Well, no, of course. You don't sit in the living room and watch television, but let's be honest here. When you're checking out a new cell phone, or Apple comes out with a new iPhone, did they improve the sound quality of the voice when you talk to somebody? No. What did they improve? They improved the visuals, the pixels, the HD viewing, That's what they've upgraded. That's what they've made different. Same thing with Samsung when they're trying to compete with the iPhone. Okay, it all has to do with how you watch and what you're watching. All right, and how we watch what is typically called television is vastly different. What I think is going to happen, and I would rather save this for the movie chapter, but I think we're going to start to meld like television and movies. The movie theater experience is going to disappear for a lot of us. Although I predicted this was going to happen about 5 or 6 years ago, it still hasn't happened yet. To where, and I think I mentioned this to you guys before, where you would pay like $25 for a new movie's coming out on a Friday. And it'll hit some theaters, but you'll get the chance. You buy it at home for $25, and of course that means you're inviting a bunch of people over. Everybody's dropping $3 or $4 into the pot if you want to come and watch this movie, and that you'll be able to watch it from your own home screen. Again, these 70-inch TVs now are so low priced. I mean, these ultra 4K 70-inch TVs. I think you can get any of them for under $1,000 now, and the picture quality is amazing. So, I do think that's going to happen. But, like I said, before COVID, Netflix was hurting. Netflix was taking a loss for the first time. Netflix was actually losing subscribers for the first time until COVID hit. And then Netflix became very important as people started to binge. As a matter of fact, I saw recently where YouTube TV had come out with a series, or YouTube came out with YouTube Premium, came out with a series based on the great 1984 80s movie Karate Kid. And of course it's Cobra Kai, and it brings back the same actors, Ralph Macchio and them, back to where they are today, where now they have kids and everything else, and they're still, Johnny Lawrence and the Ralph Macchio guy, what's his name? Daniel, what the hell's his name? Oh, Daniel LaRusso, right. So Cobra Kai was put on Netflix about a month ago and was instantly the #1 most watched program on Netflix, as people who didn't get YouTube Premium were now seeing on Netflix Cobra Kai and just binge watch the hell out of it. It's only 2 seasons so far, and that 3rd season should be coming soon. It really has changed the landscape. It's hard to say where it's going. What I do see happening, though, is I see the networks becoming less and less relevant. And it took a long time for the networks to become less and less relevant. But it looks like, whether it's Disney Plus, whether it's Hulu, Apple TV, Amazon, or of course Netflix, and any of the others that are coming or will come. That's the way. The streaming is the way to go. Don't need to have a network put together shows, especially, and I'll tell you what really surprised me about this taking for a long time, and I'm sure it's something a lot of you don't realize, because you've always watched so many things on your streaming that you've hardly ever watched a network show. But the networks still have to answer to censors. You look at Chicago Fire or Chicago Med, or some of your other programs that you like on, say, CBS or ABC, or Fox, or even some of the cable networks. They can't curse. They don't show skin. It just doesn't seem like, that's not, you look at it and you look at a situation, you're like, that's not the way I talk. I'd be saying like effing this, or, son of a this, that. And they still can't do that. And they won't do it because they're afraid to drive away their advertisers. Where when you have direct sales, like with subscription services, Netflix, or even something like HBO or something like that, they don't have to. And that's what people prefer. So it'll be interesting to see. It is in such a flux right now. So you've got your quiz. Baby boom, baby. That's what the American phenomenon was that helped to really explode the growth of television. All right, you guys. We got one more chapter before the midterm, and we're going to talk about that on Monday.